To get started on our messenger bag, we're going to create 8 pattern pieces. All of these will be drawn in half, and we will unfold them along the center lines of the patterns. To start with, here's our strap. Draw a rectangle using the rectangle tool, 24 inches wide and 2 inches high. Then add an internal rectangle that is 2 inches wide and 1.5 inches high. Position this towards the very far right in the vertical center of the strap. Next, we're going to draw 2 rectangles for the inner pocket and the outer pocket. On both of these, use your smooth curve tool to curve the lower right corner. Lock the line 1 and 2 and change the length to 1. And do the same on the other pocket as well. Next, we are going to look at our flap. Our flap is 6.5 inches wide by 14 high, and you should also put the curve in the bottom right corner of your flap. Here is our closure flap, which will help keep the bag shut. This piece is 1.25 inches by 4.5 inches high. And then our closure loop, which is 1.5 inches wide and 2 inches high. And we're going to be adding some width onto here in a minute. This is our front. We're also going to make a copy of this for the back. And finally, this is the bottom side, 7 inches wide, 4 inches high. And this we will also be extending to the right as well. If we go back to our flap, take your Edit Pattern tool and click the top segment. Right-click and say Offset as Internal Line. We're going to add 3 offsets, and these distances are going to be based on individual lines. The first distance is 1 inch, which is 1 inch from the top. The next one is 1/2 inch from that first internal line, and the last one is 4.1 inches. And click OK. Next, take your internal polygon line tool. Click anywhere here in your flap. Hold Shift and move to the right. Before you click again, right-click so that the Create Internal Polygon options comes up. And change this length here to 1.25 inches and click OK. Then move vertically down and again right-click and make sure that length is 2 inches and click OK. And then click that segment point that you just added there a second time to set the line. Then use your Transform Pattern tool to move this internal line all the way to the center and all the way to the bottom. On your closure flap, use your Add Point Split Line tool. Hover over the right segment and right-click. Change this top line, in this case it's the yellow line, to 2 inches and click OK. On your closure loop, right-click on the far right segment with Edit Pattern and say Offset Pattern Outline. Change the distance to 1/2 inch and the number of offsets to 2. And also check Create Internal Line and click OK. Next, on this new far right segment, select the segment, hold Shift, and begin to drag the line to the segment line to the right. And before you release, tap your right click. In the distance moved box, change that measurement to 1 and click OK. And on our front, select the top segment line, right click, and say Offset as internal line. Reset this back to 1 and change the distance to 3/4 of an inch and click OK. For the bottom side, with Edit Pattern tool, right click on the side segment, Offset Pattern Outline, change the number of offsets to 1 and the distance to 11 inches. We are going to use the front, make a copy of the front for the back. So I'm going to select this and simply copy paste it. And for continuity, I'm going to change the name to back. I'm going to turn off my line lengths for the moment so that I can see a little bit better. For your inner and outer pockets, the inner pocket goes on the front, the outer pocket goes on the back. I'm going to select the inner pocket shape with my Transform Pattern tool, right click and say Clone as Internal Shape. And I am going to come down to the front pattern piece and click and place that shape onto the front pattern piece. That will be where I sew the pocket to. I'm going to do the same thing for the back. For the outer pocket, clone as internal shape and put this on the back. These two horizontal lines on our front and our back are there for reference. I'm going to take my Edit Pattern tool, right click on them, and say Convert to Baseline. This will make these dotted purple lines that I can use for placement of objects. On the back pattern piece, I'm going to take my internal polygon line tool, go to the center line, click one time, press and hold Shift, move horizontally to the right, and right click. I'm going to change the length here to 6 and click OK. I'm going to hold Shift and move down and right click and change this to 1/4 of an inch and click OK. And finally, I'm going to hold Shift and come all the way across and finish this line by clicking twice to create this shape on the back. While this shape is still selected, I'm going to copy it and paste it onto the flap. This is going to go right here. This internal line is also a reference line, so I can convert this to a baseline if I would like as well. On the front of my back, I'm again going to use my internal polygon line tool, similar to the way I did right here on the back. Only this shape is going to be 1.5 inches wide, 2 inches high. I'm going to finish here in the center. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my Transform Pattern tool to select this internal shape and copy it. And then I'm going to paste it onto the bottom side, vertically in the center, towards the very right side. And I have all of my pattern pieces for my messenger bag. Note that they are lined up here along this dark line in my 2D window. Next, we are going to select the center lines, which are up against this heavier guideline, right-click, and say Unfold Symmetric Editing with Sewing. We can do them one at a time, or we can do multiple together. And so there are all of my pattern pieces. I'm going to quickly save this, and we can move on to the next step. We have all of our pattern pieces here. We're going to use from our library one of the 3D shape avatars. I'm going to right-click it and say Add to Workspace. I'm then going to activate my arrangement points. Next, I am going to select the pattern pieces, place the front on the front, the back on the back. I'm going to place the bottom on the center bottom arrangement point so that the sides fold up. And then I'm going to select the strap and put this on the top here. For the moment, that is all I'm going to arrange. These other pattern pieces here, I'm going to select them, right-click, and deactivate them so that I can begin to assemble my bag here. I'm going to deactivate my arrangement points, and in my 3D window, I am going to use segment sewing to sew the seams together. Using segment sewing in the 3D window can be helpful, especially when you are creating a handbag where your seams are a little bit different than they would be on a garment. I'm going to use segment sewing here on these two squares so I can accurately sew them together. The symmetric sewing that we added to our pattern pieces helps us so that all of these things come together easily. Next, I'm going to right-click on my avatar and say Deactivate Hide. Before I simulate, I'm going to come to the top of my strap, hold down the W key on my keyboard, and click in the center of the strap. This is going to add a pin. This will keep our handle up in the air when we simulate. The other thing is that if you have not done so already, for your fabric, go to the very bottom and make sure that your physical property preset is changed to trim full grain leather. This will help our bag to stand up nicely. Now I'm going to simulate. As we can see, some of the edges are rounded when we might want them to be a corner. The way that we correct this is that we select the seam line with the Edit Sewing tool, and we click the turned checkbox for that seam line. When we then simulate, you will see that those seam lines become a corner. So you need to do that on all of the segments that you would like to have as a corner. In this case, it would be the front and the back, the side and the bottom. And when you then simulate, you will see that your bag has a more natural shape. You can also select this internal line on the bottom side and change that fold angle to 90. And that will allow your bag corner on the bottom to sit nice and flat. Next, let's put our pockets in. Here is our inner pocket, and I'm going to move this down by the front. And here is our outer pocket. I'm going to move that one down by the back. I'm simply going to take my free sewing tool, start on the upper right corner of the pocket, stop at the center, and match it to the internal line on the front. And do the same with the outer pocket. These two pattern pieces are still deactivated. So I am going to select them, right-click, and say Activate. The front pocket, I want to go inside. So here in the 3D window, I'm going to right-click and say Superimpose Under. And the back pocket will go on the outside. So I'm going to say Superimpose Over. And so there we can see our two pockets. Superimpose under, superimpose over, and if I simulate, I can now turn on my thick textured surface so that I can begin to see how my bag is actually coming together. To add the flap in, I'm going to select it here. I am going to, in the 3D window, use my gizmo to rotate it so that it is parallel to the ground. And then I'm going to move it so that this area is hovering over the opening of the bag. Let's activate it. These two internal lines are there so we can fold. So I'm going to take my fold arrangement tool, click this line. Here is my fold gizmo, and I want to fold this tab down, and I want to fold this tab down. And what we need to do now is to sew this shape to this shape. You could sew this in the 2D window with free sewing or the 3D window, whatever you would like. It's very easy to use segment sewing here to sew these shapes in the 3D window. I'm going to use my gizmo to slide this down and simulate. The nice thing about Clo is that you can make edits as you go. For example, my bag seems to be pinching together a bit up here. So I think I'd like to move these internal lines a little bit further in this way. So here I will just go in my 2D window, shift select these, and move these slightly. And there we can see them now. And if I simulate, there we go. And so two small pieces left. The closure flap and the closure loop. The closure flap, you'll remember that we added a segment point here. This is so that we can sew this very easily into place. I can superimpose over this piece, activate, simulate. And our last piece is a loop that we've made so that we can have a simple closure on the front of our bag. I'm going to activate this pattern piece. And I'm going to use my fold arrangement tool to create a simple closed shape. Now I'm going to segment sew the back seam together. And then I'm going to use my segment sewing in my 3D window to attach this loop to the bag itself. And before I simulate, I'm actually going to move it into place so that it is around my strap. And there we have our messenger bag. Let's now move on to the visual appearance of our messenger bag. The first thing I'm going to do in the 3D window is I'm going to hide my my internal lines and my base lines. The next thing I'm going to do is use my high-res garment function to increase the quality of my pattern pieces. So when I simulate them, they will look nicer in the 3D window. Next, I'm going to select my strap, my closure flap, and my closure loop. And I'd like to give them a little bit more body. I'm going to do this by selecting the pattern pieces. In my simulation properties, I'm going to increase the rendering thickness to 1. That is visually going to make my pattern pieces look thicker. I'm then going to check this double-sided option here so that these will now look like double-sided pattern pieces. There are also a few areas where the 3D seam line is causing some visual issues, like here around this closure and our line here. So if you would like, you can select these sewing segments and remove the intensity from the 3D seam line with the Edit Sewing tool. So then you will be able to see that these look a little nicer. I'm also going to do it, although we are going to need three-dimensional seam lines, I'm going to do it on these two internal shapes as well. That will allow me to get a better effect when I add top stitching. So all of these now, I'm going to remove the intensity there. Also, I could do the same thing for the front pocket. In case we would want to show this open, we wouldn't want to see this 3D seam line here. I'm going to now bring that back. Next, I'm going to use the default top stitch that is here. I'm going to start by making some edits to my default top stitch. I'm going to increase the thread thickness to 100. And I'm going to come to the very bottom down here, and I'm going to change the configuration from front to both and activate the 3D seam line. That is going to allow me to get a nice effect with my top stitch. Watch what happens here in my 3D window when I add my top stitch to my strap. Now I have a nice top stitch there, and because I've added both sides, I have it on the inside and the outside, and the offset is 1/16 of an inch. I'm then going to duplicate this top stitch and change the offset of this top stitch from 1/16 to 0. That's going to allow me to put a top stitch on an internal line, and it will go in the center of this internal line and give me some nice effects. I have added more top stitch detail on the pieces of my messenger bag. Let's work on the fabric material itself. Select the fabric in the object browser. In the property editor, make sure that the type is changed to leather. I'm going to scroll down here until I see the color option here, and I'm going to click this color box. I'm selecting the Pantone tab here, and I'm going to use the search box and search for brown. And I can click on these various options here. And when I find one that I like, I'm going to say apply and close. So now our fabric looks like leather, has the color of leather, and it acts like leather. Let's add one more thing here to improve this. We want the illusion that it has the depth of a piece of leather. So I'm going to go into my library and go into the normal map box here. These normal maps are image maps that can be added to assets to give the appearance of three-dimensionality. I am going to use the one that says leather lambskin, and I'm going to drag this right on top of the messenger bag. Chloe is asking me, what would you like to do with it? This is important. Make sure you select normal map and click OK. Then when you select the fabric here in the object browser, you will notice that there is a normal map applied. You can adjust the intensity. So if you push it up, it will get more detailed. And you can also change the size of it. So if you want a little bit bigger look, let's say 6 inches. And so now this has a little bit thicker dimensionality. I'm going to now turn on simulation so I can see how we're doing with this. And I'd like to make a couple simple changes. One is that I'm selecting the fold angle here on the top, and I'm simply going to push this up a little bit while it's simulating. And what will happen is I will see that fold angle change a little bit on the top of my bag. I'm going to do the same thing with the other one. Notice that while I'm simulating, my top stitchings are not showing. This is expected. Finally, what I'd like to do is I'm going to go into my hardware and trims and go into the graphic area. And you will notice that there is a Chloe graphic here. I'm going to double click this, and it's going to go into my object browser. And I would like to put the Chloe logo right here on the front of my loop. So I'm going to drag it from here to here. There's my Chloe logo. And I can scale it so it fits in. And if I select it in the object browser, you'll notice that the type is fabric matte. I'm going to say metal. That's going to give my logo some dimensionality, make it look shiny. And because this is blue, I would like for it to be just white. I'm going to click this desaturation option here so that this just becomes a silver logo. And I'd like it to have the texture. So right here, I'm going to check this box that says use same map as front, and then my logo will then have the same texture as the front of my fabric.